Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast where no one can hear you scream. I am Marc Dottavio.
And I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we welcome podcaster and musician Bob Ethington to discuss two ambitious, high-profile flops from two of the 70s most ambitious, high-profile auteurs. Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola were following up some of their most beloved American films ever made when they sunk huge budgets into experiments that blew up in their faces, and that might even share some of the blame for the end of the new Hollywood era as we know it. Those movies are Spielberg's 1979 epic historical farce, 1941, and Coppola's lavish musical romance, One from the Heart. And now here's one from ours. Thank you. Bob Ethington is here with us in Akron, Ohio. He was once a member of the acclaimed rock band Tin Huey. He now hosts the podcast From Akron and Beyond, sponsored by the Summit FM.
That is true, yes.
So about what can you tell us about your podcast?
Well, we started it about almost 2 years ago. And the idea of it originally was to kind of focus on the local musicians and some of the music, that is kind of become quote unquote legendary from this area. Obviously Devo, bands like that, but then some of the other ones too. There was a whole scene here that was quite popular at the time. It seemed like a lot of bands were going to make it big. Almost no one did, but it was still a fun time. Lots of people went to shows and went out to see bands play. And so it sort of started with interviewing people like that, people from the Numbers Band, Bob Kidney and Jack Kidney, Chai Pig, just a wide variety of Chris Butler.
I love the Chris Butler one, from The Waitresses.
Yes, of The Waitresses, right. And but then the idea kind of became, well, okay, we call it From Akron and Beyond. So it's sort of like, if you have a connection with Akron in any way, and we think you're doing something interesting, we might well have you on the show as a guest. And so basically we now have had people like, the owner of Hop and Frog Brewery. We had a guy on named Myron Vernus, who most people don't know who he is, but he's a car collector of he has this huge collection of high-end specialized cars. They're in some undisclosed location in Talmadge. He won't say where they are, but he sold cars to Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno and stuff. These, guys that are multimillionaires who collect all these crazy cars. And so we had him on, and it was just, and I don't know anything about cars, but it was nonetheless fascinating to talk to him and just hear his story. So, yeah, we've had a wide variety of guests on, and it's going strong. So we're really enjoying doing it.
All right. Movies ever come up in the course of these conversations?
Yes, from time to time. In fact, we have one episode which hasn't run yet, which is our favorite music-related movies.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, that's not too far off the mark from some of the things we're going to talk about today.
That's true.
I do just love the idea of zeroing in on regional history. Mm-hmm. And I think you said it's sort of a time capsule more. And yeah, regardless of what the region is, whether it's something as wild as New York or just some suburb of Tennessee, I think it is worth investigating and exciting and everything.
Yeah, that's kind of our idea. I mean, some of the people that we've had on are pretty well known and some aren't, but they're all doing things that are interesting. So,
Jeffrey Dahmer, you got to get him on.
Yeah, that would be nice. Well, we are going to have Derf Backderf on, who did the My Friend Dahmer book. So, graphic novels. So
awesome.
That should be good.
It teaches you to make that joke, Seth.
I know.
There you go. He's going to have a Dahmer guy on.
He might have his contact info, so you can get Dahmer's contact info.
Yeah, he might be hard to reach currently. But
Yeah.
Always was.
that was the problem.
They Skype from hell, don't they?
Well, speaking of Jeffrey Dahmer, let's talk about Steven Spielberg.
They often are paired together.
Great segue.
Yeah.
I kind of seeing this episode as maybe a kind of a doing justice to the film's Heaven's Gate, which we did in a previous episode, and tends to get all of the blame for being the end of the 1970s New Hollywood auteur-driven era that just went over budget and over schedule with this maniacal directorial vision, and then came out to bomb, to have critical pans, and it basically ruined Michael Cimino's career.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah. And now auteurs are not allowed to do whatever it is they want to do and have these lavish productions, and they don't believe in the director anymore. And it's all committee or something after that, which is, it just seems after you watch these, which are not long after, it does feel like, I think these maybe had something to do with it too, especially given the fact that it's Spielberg and Coppola and just, blowing all their money, like so much money on these.
There are also movies that particularly went from the heart, which really were doomed from the start because all of the coverage about them, all the media coverage was about their budgets and how they were going so far over budget. It reminds me, Heaven's Gate is the classic example. Ishtar would be another example.
Oh,
of
yeah,
that,
absolutely.
Where, I mean, by the time that movie came out, no one even cared if it was any good or if it was funny. All they saw was this movie that how could it possibly have cost this much money, and it bombed. And now it's, Elaine May directed it. It's kind of a cult favorite now, and so's Heaven's Gate if you see the uncut version, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and which I think is a really good movie. And like you were saying, we would kind of dissect it as to the way the deck was stacked against it when it first came out completely, because it is not a bad, in no definition is it a bad movie, like whatsoever. And for people to consider it one of the worst ever made is like, you must not watch any movies ever to possibly think that.
No, and it's stuff that still happens with that whole narrative. It becomes a talking point. Like if you bring up the movie, everybody has the thing to say about it because of what's being talked about in headlines or what's being talked about now on the internet and stuff. Like trailers come out and they instantly, it's just like, you already know what's going to happen to this movie, which is just really a shame. It doesn't have anything to do with the real movie itself.
And no one movie was responsible for the, shift in, Hollywood blockbuster filmmaking, which I think these two movies, along with Heaven's Gate, would be like the trifecta of them. Also, Ishtar would be one to throw in. And I think Scorsese has his own with New York, New York. That all of these are in the discussion, and some of them are actually pretty good movies, and some are not. I think some of the ones we're going to talk about today are a little iffy, but we'll see where we all fall down when those come. But 1941 is a little different because, first of all, unlike Elaine May, Michael Cimino, even Francis Ford Coppola to an extent, this in no way did this sink Spielberg's career. And it actually wasn't even necessarily a flop. It didn't make as much money as people expected it to.
Yeah.
It just didn't make Close Encounters money or Jaws money.
He was just on such a hot streak at that time, right? So
yes. But it was not as warmly received. It definitely did not get the reviews that those other movies did.
No.
But just for some context, he was, right in the middle of one of the most incredible runs in mainstream like Hollywood movie making ever. We had Jaws in 1975. Then Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, E.T. in 1982, all in a row, and smack right there in the middle between Close Encounters and Raiders is 1941. What the hell is this thing?
Right.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's surrounded by four of, for my money, of the best movies ever made is just kind of incredible. And none of these other ones really fit that. Maybe
comparatively,
New York,
this is the one that seems so much more dated in a certain respect than those other ones, even though those are like staples of that era. Like this one just, it's just weird. It is a stumble.
Yeah, well, that's partly, I think, due to what he was trying to do in that movie in 1941, but the dated quality. But not only are those other four films you mentioned like great films, there also were hugely financially successful movies, right? And
oh yeah, for sure.
And went on to sell all kinds of toys and lunchboxes and merch, that also became a phenomenon of what Hollywood wanted from their movies. A lot of side product that they could market.
That's a good point, because it is a birth of a new problem for Hollywood, which is the idea that, maybe a few years before this, the amount of money 1941 made would have been fine, and the amount of audience like what they thought of it would have been fine. But now everything's got to be fucking Star Wars,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, honestly, it's Spielberg's other movies that we just mentioned that probably were more responsible for the shift in, the way that movies were made than all these flops that we're talking about.
Right. I mean, the common story on this, and it's been documented in books like Easy Riders, Raising Bulls. Maybe you've read that by Peter Biskin. There's other books on the topic as well. But basically, in a nutshell, you had the Hollywood films of the late 50s and surely going into the early 60s to mid 1960s were just so out of touch with audiences. I mean, they were big blockbuster type movies, but they weren't making that much money. They, I'm talking about things like My Fair Lady and a remake of King of Kings, all of these, religious epics and things like that. They just weren't really resonating with audiences. And that was in a day when, television is going to destroy the movies. This was the big worry at the time. And then Easy Rider gets made. And Easy Rider gets made for a pittance by Hollywood standards, like I think something like $250,000, something like that. Ends up making millions and millions of dollars. And the Hollywood execs suddenly say like, okay, we're out of touch, but I like how this made all this money. Let's make these kind of movies. And what those kind of movies at the time, and this, oddly enough, is reflected in music as well a few years later, the same kind of thing. You had all these young directors making these movies at fairly low budgets that were all breaking even or making money, usually making pretty much money, but not millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. They were not making that kind of money. And so I think that Jaws and then Lucas's Star Wars are sort of the 1-2 punch that's often mentioned as sort of like wiping out that era of, what I guess you'd call the 70s films, Renaissance or whatever, movies like Chinatown and, Mean Streets and stuff like that. It became harder for those kind of movies to get made because they wanted more money. And it's the same thing with music. There used to be major labels would put out artists that they knew they weren't going to make millions of dollars or sell a million copies, but they'd record them kind of on the cheap and they would make enough money back to make it worthwhile. And and it was a lot of great music. And then at a certain point it became like, no, it has to be the Eagles or Fleetwood Mac, Rumors kind of money for us to really be behind the bands, and so there's kind of a corollary there, I think, between the two industries.
Yeah, for sure. And now you could look at 1941 as kind of this just gargantuan monster that was birthed of trying to achieve that, while also, I guess, kind of having its own unique artistic vision, you could say, whether it's successful or not. But I think another important piece of context here is that this was written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who they would go on to write Back to the Future, and they were hot off the success of I Want to Hold Your Hand. And I was reading about the origins of how this movie started out, and apparently the original pitch was for it to be a drama with the title "The Night the Japs Attacked."
That would have aged even better. Wow.
Yeah, which is kind of funny that the non-comedic version is what they use. You hear the term Japs a lot in this movie, which it kind of gets away with because it is this big, broad, cartoony, supposedly satire. But
it is a satire, whether it's successful or not.
Well, the original idea for the movie, or with the title that you were alluding to, was from John Milius. And, he's like this hard-ass writer-director who, of course, like also was the main guy behind Apocalypse Now, the idea of Apocalypse Now. So, he intended it to be a drama. Yeah,
At some point, once Spielberg got involved, it turned into a comedy.
Right.
Which maybe that kind of reflects the whole like Dr. Strangelove thing, where they were originally setting out to just adapt a book in a serious way and then realized, hey, these situations are kind of funny. And I feel like this partly wants to be Dr. Strangelove, but it also wants to be like a Mad Magazine special or National Lampoon, where everyone is nuts. Or even like an actual Warner Brothers cartoon. Well, like there's so much just reality breaking, like mugging for the camera and these big slapstick gags.
Yeah, it's good you brought up Dr. Strangelove. It also reminds me of if somebody just sort of read a plot, like a shitty plot synopsis of Gravity's Rainbow or something, and they just heard like, oh yeah, so World War II, but there's erections and stuff, and it's all sex infused, and there's silly jokes in it. Okay, we'll run with that. And it's like, we'll make a Gravity's Rainbow movie, but it's just like, it's obviously like, it does have like layers and layers of outrageous characters and conspiracy and like sort of hidden history, paranoia and stuff going on. And like everything in the movie is like sexual in some regard. It's like from the very get-go, we have an homage to Jaws in the opening scene where the naked woman is running out. And it's like, so Spielberg already from the start, there's like a weird uncanny feeling that Spielberg is lampooning himself or something.
Yeah.
And then there's like a phallic object of a antenna from a submarine that scoops up the lady, and like Japanese guys looking up and like, oh my. And immediately you're in a strange place.
Jaws, which was only 4 years old when this came out, too.
Right.
He was kind of parodying it himself in the opening scene with the actual same actress from the opening scene of Jaws. So
I didn't know it was the same one.
Oh, it's the same one.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't realize.
Yeah, and when you say a lot of characters, I think another inspiration, I think that's undeniable for this, which Spielberg must have said at some point, was it's a mad, 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 mad world from 1963, which brought in absolutely every big comedic actor like in the country all in one movie. And this movie has, I mean, we have SNL guys like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, and SCTV guys like John Candy and Joe Flaherty. We have Christopher Lee as the German commandant.
Evil vampiric Nazi man.
Toshiro Mifune, poor Toshiro Mifune from all of the Kurosawa
so
films.
Crazy.
And we got Ned Beatty, and we got Robert Stack from Airplane. We got Slim Pickens from Dr. Strangelove.
Doing Slim Pickens thing, but he's a Christmas tree guy because it's a Christmas movie also. Of course it is. It's got to be.
And none of them do anything funny in 3 hours. Sorry, 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours.
I mean, I'm a little tickled here and there, especially at the beginning. For me, the thing that happens with the movie is just fatigue, especially if we're talking, and there are two versions of this, and we'll get into that. There's the theatrical cut, which is, how long is that?
2 hours.
It's 2 hours. Oh, okay. I thought it was like a little shorter, but yeah, it's the version that's out there now is the extended 2.5 hour cut, which I don't know. I guess what I'm really saying is like after 30 to 40 minutes, I was kind of like, it's still going, like still spooning things into my face and tying me in the face with more and more lampoons and silly innuendos and stuff. But I was like kind of having a good time because you are being gifted just all the budget in the world to do all the wacky things in the world and all these actors that you know and love. So you are excited for at least the first 30 minutes of the movie, as far as I'm concerned.
I think it was interesting that Spielberg at this point in his career would try to make this sort of screwball, funny, loud comedy. And yes, it's a mad, 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 mad world is obviously like its predecessor. So I guess I'll just state right now that I can't stand It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And this movie drove me nuts. And the words that you guys are using, exhausting, it's so loud. And it's so much stuff just coming at you constantly. But it isn't that funny. That's the problem. I was sat there like stone-faced through most of this thing. Like, it's supposed to be funny, I guess. There's a few funny moments. But I was also struck right from the beginning of the film. So you've got John Belushi. He essentially is, except that he's a pilot, a fighter pilot in World War II era, Air Force or whatever. He's essentially doing his Bluto routine from Animal House. He breaks the bottle. He can't open the bottle, breaks it against his head, drinks out of it. I mean, this is all exactly what he does in Animal House. And then you have Tim Matheson, who, again, it's like he's playing the exact same character he played in Animal House. He's like this smarmy guy who's, always trying to hit on the women and has these like cheap lines and stuff. And I'm like, did they just walk over from Animal House and just,
and from the poster onward, the Belushi is like billed as such an important part of the movie. And I figured he would be like the movie's just banking on him in some big way. And yeah, all it is just like, hey, audience, you remember John Belushi? And now there's probably audience members who would watch this and be like, I don't even know who this is.
Well, my understanding is that he came on late to the movie and immediately became the star, except he isn't really. I mean, in terms of, I don't know who you'd say the star is,
his
but
parts
it's not
are very
him.
sectioned off from everybody
Right.
else's.
Yeah. It almost seems like they're tacked on.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then like you've got John Candy, who's hilarious, but he only has a few lines in the movie. Really. Mickey Rourke is in this movie. I don't think he has a single line. This is one of those things where I'm watching the film and I'm like, is that Mickey Rourke? Now, granted, he's not exactly known for his comedic genius, but still, what's he doing in this movie? And why does he not even have a line? I was kind of flabbergasted.
I could believe there's Terrence Malick portions where it's like whole movie stars are cut out of the movie by the end of it, and then they thought like, oh yeah, like I thought, I'm Mickey Rourke, and I didn't. My whole subplot is cut out.
Right.
Yeah, otherwise the movie would be 4 hours, and I'm sure there's probably 4 hours of it somewhere.
Right, and you've alluded to the two different versions. I did suffer so that
we're so
our
proud of you,
listeners
Bob.
would not have to, and watched both versions. I originally watched the theatrical version because I'm figuring, well, this is the one that got panned. So, and Seth, you're right. It's a little under 2 hours, but not much. It's like an hour 54 minutes, something like that. So it's pretty close to 2 hours. And one of the things that struck me and also annoyed the hell out of me in watching that version of it was like, it seems like at some point, comedy or no, you have to care about the characters a little bit. Couldn't even figure out what the point. I mean, I didn't know what the story was. Apparently, this guy wants to be a dancer, but we're just supposed to accept that. I mean, you know what I mean? There were all these.
Yeah, there's that central thing where the boy and the girl, and they want to go to the dance and dance and stuff.
Yeah, there's just all these things, but you don't really now in the 2.5 hour long version, you do get a little more backstory. Not enough. To justify the existence of the film, much less the length of the 2.5 hour version. But it did at least seem to have a little more coherence to it in terms of the plot. But and then I also have to mention what had to be one of the most nightmarish. I don't know how long the scene is in the movie. It's probably something like 5 minutes. It seemed like it was about 45. The Ferris wheel scene with Eddie Deason, and
his ventriloquist dummy.
Oh my God.
And his father.
Yeah. He's like Jerry Lewis's id. It's like the most annoying possible character you can imagine.
You could possibly imagine an annoying Jerry Lewis You can stretch your imagination.
That's what I'm saying. It's like yes. It's like Jerry Lewis is the most subtle comedian that ever existed compared to this guy, and he just the way you must know the scene I'm talking about.
Yes.
They're on the Ferris wheel, and one guy's afraid of the heights, and so he's like, "I mean, it's fun. We're gonna move it back and forth." I'm not making a derogatory impersonation of him. This is what
you just did is
like.
way funnier than what he does in the film.
It was horrible.
But you're right. Yeah. That's a very short scene because we have basically these 4 kind of main threads that seem to just never ever end. And one of them is we have Richard. Is it Richard Matheson or Tim Matheson?
Tim Matheson,
who's with Nancy Allen, and they have this kind of what's supposed to be like screwball banter, but it is just dire.
Yes.
Like nothing funny whatsoever. It's all double entendres and innuendo. About
is that the one about the lady who wants to fuck she wants to fuck on a plane.
She only gets aroused if she's on a plane.
Which again is very Gravity's Rainbow, but like I had no idea. I like giggled at first, and then I had no idea it would be an entire half hour of the movie.
Right.
On and on and on. And I mean, they cut to other threads and then back and back and back and back and back.
Yep.
And at the same time, we have this other kid who is trying to get the girl who in turn is trying to avoid basically a prolonged sexual assault from a guy who's chasing her around.
Right.
Yeah, how zany.
And there's this big ballroom like dance sequence where first it's a brawl, then everyone's dancing, then all the dancers are fighting, then the fight goes outside, and we just keep cutting back to it and back to it and back to it.
And then the army shows up, and then they got to blow up all the lights.
And it just feels like
Japanese
it goes on for absolutely forever. And then it cuts away to John Belushi over and over and over again, flying around in a plane. And then to them watching Dumbo over and over and over again. We see practically the whole movie.
That's a good bit, though. That's a good bit.
Robert Stack's one of the best things in the movie.
Robert Stack.
Yeah, the scene where he's crying at Dumbo, actually, I thought was pretty funny.
Honestly, I loved watching, like, anytime Dumbo came on, I was like, oh, now I'm watching Dumbo.
No, I'm watching Dumbo. This is awesome. It's not 1941. And Robert Stack loves Dumbo, and it's clearly, I feel like he must have been following Dumbo because it only had just come out probably. So he's probably going from town to town.
That supposedly is a true story. That character, the General Stilwell, was a real guy. And he was a World War II general that he was stationed there, and he did love Dumbo.
He loved Dumbo.
Yes. That's the one fun fact I can share with you about this guy.
Was this before? This was after Airplane?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my God.
I believe so.
Because I love him in Airplane, and I mean, I think he's one of the funniest parts of this movie too. And
I don't think he gets anything funny to do or say in this
other than
movie.
Cry at Dumbo. Yeah,
and he has such a perfect, funny, like deadpan voice.
That's it. He just plays it so straight.
Yeah, but they don't give him anything that's even to be funny played straight.
No.
This whole script is just there's nothing funny happening. But like you were saying, Bob, it is so loud. Everyone's shouting and screaming. Yeah. The end credits, they're one of those end credits where they have a picture of each person, and it's literally each actor just yelling their head off. Yes. And that's the whole movie in a nutshell. Like, this movie was a sound wave. It would just be a solid red block.
I'd forgotten about that. That's right. At the end, they show all the actors, and every one of them, they're screaming. I couldn't. That's what I felt like doing at that point.
Yes,
but we could not have been more appropriate. No, that's
and like you were saying, you can't. There's nobody to get invested in, even on the most superficial, comedic level. And there's no straight man in the men in this anywhere. No. Everyone is this loud, unfunny cartoon. And
it made me question things like, for instance, like Treat Williams is in the film, and
he's
Bobby
the sexual assault,
and Bobby DeCicco's in the film, and both these guys, I'm like, they're just unappealing. I made me start to think, like, are they always this unappealing in every movie they made? Because they were totally unappealing in this. I mean, they had no charisma in the least. There was, and it just it made me also start to think, like, is Spielberg ever funny? And then I thought, well, yeah. I mean, Jaws has some humorous moments to it. E.T. does. Even Raiders does.
For sure.
I mean, it definitely does.
I was thinking about this a lot.
Because but in this movie, I'm thinking like, based on this film, he has no sense of humor. He thinks anything crashing into something else is hilarious.
Or naughty dick jokes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And because he doesn't do full out comedies, this is maybe the only one that you could say in his whole filmography that is a 100% comedy. Other ones that come close would be like The Terminal or Always. I am not listing his like best loved movies. And those have more of a romantic comedy kind of angle to them. But no, his movies can be very funny, but it's in very clever structural ways. It's character-based humor.
Right.
The whole thing with Indiana Jones, shooting the guy in Raiders is perfectly, conceived and executed, like funny moment.
And supposedly improvised by Harrison Ford.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And maybe, I don't know, I have to put a lot of blame on Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, I guess.
Yeah.
It's funny, the Back to the Future script is so precise and orderly and sophisticated, and the humor comes out of the situations, and it's like ingenious. And this is just like the opposite of that. It's throwing everything in the kitchen sink, and it's just cacophony, and nobody stands out. It swallows everybody.
Yeah, I can't state how much that this is. I was just so surprised about how raunchy it was for a Spielberg movie, especially like an earlier Spielberg movie. I guess it's sort of piggybacking on the whole Animal House, like college humor of the day, like stand-up comedy, like things like that of
Another
that time.
thing that Spielberg just has no touch for.
Not at all the thing you would pin him on. He's the lovable uncle guy. I was really amazed at that, and the fact that, I mean, and I'm not even downplaying it as like that's a bad direction. It is interesting to talk about this time period, which is viewed as a very sexless time period, which is obviously no time period is sexless and all that. And it's like, obviously they're all horny and war was happening at the same time. But, and it sounds silly because I don't know if you would necessarily put real sex scenes in this, but there isn't. None of it culminates, which is weird. It's all just calling attention to how horny everyone is, and they're all grabbing at each other, but nobody actually hooks up. There's no actual sex. It's not. It's like still afraid of sex. At the end of the day,
it's all performative. It's like the idea of a sex comedy.
Still kind of straight laced in that way of just like, ooh, I'm naughty, but we would never,
Just in the same way that I know it's a comedy, but no one ever dies.
That no one ever dies. No one ever fucks.
We have planes crashing into buildings, we have gunfire exchanged, and every annoying character lives to keep being annoying.
Right. And all of it is out of a misunderstanding of historical event that never happened, a battle that never actually occurs. Right. It's all just for naught.
I mean, this is ultimately in its uncut version, a 2.5 hour long film. And I chuckled a little bit once, and it was very early in the film. There's like, of course, what else? A brawl in a diner. And John Candy says, "Look out, he's got a chicken leg," which I thought was sort of funny. He probably improvised that line. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that's kind of fun. I mean, and then what I started to notice was an hour's gone by and John Candy hasn't said a thing. Or if he says anything, it's just something that's part of the plot, I mean,
or he's doing that sort of racist bit. There's like there
is that
kind of a very like, I don't know. It almost feels like there's you're like, finally there's one black guy in this movie, and then of course the entire bit is just John Candy being racist to him, and they're being mean to each other, and they, I don't know, sort of do a whole like, well, what does color mean anyways by the end of the movie kind of thing. And they
he gets
sort of make up
the hilarious joke where the black guy ends up with white paint over his face, and John Candy ends up with accidental blackface, and they're laughing at each other, and then slowly
it's all solved
as they realize what's going on.
See, 1941, they already solved the race problem. I don't know what everybody's talking about. See. But
even as a satire, it's like they start out with everyone thinks that the Japanese are attacking when they aren't, but they actually are, just
They
not
are.
not in the same place. So it doesn't even work in this conceptual
Right.
Dr. Strangelove type way.
Right.
And there's just nothing going on.
The Japanese part is uncomfortable. It's weird to have Americans making sort of cartoons out of the Japanese. I don't know, in this sort of way, obviously making them say something in your funny accent. There's definitely that going on. And also just the idea that I just keep on thinking about like World War II and the Japanese. All I can think about is like, we are going to bomb them and start the atomic era and Hiroshima and all that. And
Well, it's possible that Spielberg,
Hard to laugh.
I'm not defending any of this, but it's possible.
Whoa,
that-
sorry. Let me.
Okay.
fired. It's over.
Well, I guess that mode. Hang on.
Does not. Now we got to get in a brawl. I'm going to break a
right.
bottle. And
Okay, that's all right. Let's start over. Let's go back to the beginning.
Very beginning.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, what were you saying?
I'm not defending the racial stereotypes in this film. However, Spielberg, at the age that he is, he was probably glomming onto a lot of the propaganda from the 1940s when the war was on. I mean, have you ever watched any of those Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny
sure.
cartoons and stuff that,
Mhm.
where, they're completely racial, like racist caricatures, especially the Japanese. And, so I think that's informing his sense of humor on this sort of.
Yeah, it makes sense because it is a whole cartoon world. It's just,
which
it's just lame, you know?
I mean, the only
it's-
guy who has any integrity at all in this film, with the possible exception of Robert Stack character, is the Toshiro Mifune character, right? He's the only one who's seen. It's pathetic. You feel you can't help but watch him and just feel bad for him. But at the same time, he still seems like, that character compared to the German, compared to Christopher Lee's character, it's sort of. I mean, I don't know. The word dignity really doesn't fit this movie. It doesn't.
Yeah.
I want to retract that.
Well, I
You
think
leave it in, but I'm retracting it.
I think you're touching on, in a vacuum at least, what is on paper interesting about this movie to me, which is that it is an adaptation of this sort of dreamy idea of this time period.
Yeah.
Which was a fantasy, and the way people at that time and people still sometimes look back at that time as being this fantastical, like us and them, and everything was good. Like this feels like a moving Norman Rockwell painting, like, we keep on saying cartoon, and it is just outwardly that. It's just painting that portrait of that time period, and like not how it was, but how it was dreamed to be.
I may be giving this film far more credit than it deserves, but there's also this theme or sub-theme, if even that sounds like a ridiculous word to use, but of Hollywood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, part of it is Hollywood is it's this fantasy world. It's this non-reality. I mean, and, it's kind of funny that this, again, I don't want to use the word funny in regard to this film, but it's part of the story of the film is that the Japanese are trying to bomb Hollywood. They can't actually find it. Which is almost like, because is Hollywood even real?
Yeah.
Just a fantasy. But boy,
and the whole situation.
I'm giving this way too more intellectual
No. The whole
weight than it
situation
deserves.
is a fantasy and stuff. I mean, again, these are. It's not like it's impossible for you to find some interesting ideas going on in here. They are throwing everything at it here. It's a cartoon World War II Magnolia, but shitty. So I don't know. There's things in here. It's just the actual sitting down and watching it is just a real chore.
I think I that Ferris wheel scene with Eddie Deason almost broke me.
I was numb by then.
I was like, I wasn't
numb.
sure how much longer I could take it. I'm like, well, I have to stick this out. But,
and the money, I mean, really the budget and the bigness is just a big problem here because it has all of these visual ideas. Like it wants to show us a rolling Ferris wheel off into a dock, and it looks great.
Yeah.
Or tanks going through a paint factory, or at the end, an entire giant house falling over the side of a cliff, which looks like they obviously just actually did that.
Yeah. Real house.
And they just had all these ideas of, man, what a great, crazy, wild, expensive thing to show you, but none of it is funny or serves any purpose.
No, you watch that
the
house
whole idea.
go off. And it's funny you bring that up because that's sort of a big climax of the film, I guess, a big finale. And I remember watching it and thinking, I wonder if they had to film this like 4 or 5 times. You know what I mean?
Because 4 houses fit into the budget.
Right. Because they, why not? They have to get the shot right. There are a lot of camera angles.
There are, I noticed
and
that.
So I think they had plenty of coverage. I think they were trying to do it in just one take. But again, that's funny. No, I'm not laughing at that. It's just stupid.
And again, it's just noise by then because I've seen it all. I've seen it all and then some by the end of this 2.5 hour explosion.
You almost wish they had. Almost wish, in the context of that film, you almost wish the Japanese had invented the atomic bomb.
See, yeah, it'd be a real short movie.
Yeah,
it'd be really loud, but be shorter. So.
Yeah. Well, and so I'll make this my final thoughts, and then I'll give everybody a chance to say anything that you didn't get a chance to bring up and declare whether you would unwatch this film or not. This is pretty easy unwatch for me because it is so long and exhausting that it really is like a chore to get through. And I've seen I've never seen the theatrical version. I've seen the uncut one twice now. I never thought I'd watch it again. Then this podcast came into my life. So thank you. And as I have seen all of Spielberg's movies to date, and I can say with confidence that this is the worst one that he ever made.
He's officially done it all.
I have it right there behind The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Hook, probably. But yeah, it's absolute bottom of the barrel, and it is fascinating that it came out when it did and not as some part of some kind of career downturn for him, which has never really happened. He had maybe some slower years in like the late 2000s, 2010s or something, but he's like Scorsese. He's always just going to live on and keep going. And I guess at least he got this out of his system, and maybe he learned some good lessons from this early on about how things can go spectacularly wrong, and he course corrected right away. So I'm happy for that. I can't wait to never ever watch this again. Seth?
Yeah, it would be really cool to not watch this, and I think I would unwatch this. Even though I do have some hesitation about some of what I've said, which is the cartooniness and even the time capsule aspect of it being this. Yeah, again, it is a dream of the fantasy that we partake in when we're in a time period, believing things are one way when they actually aren't. And if we actually had a realistic drama of what it was like in the war years, and there's plenty of them, that like this is not it. This is the cartoon version of it. And there are certain aspects, like there's certain points, like Dan Aykroyd, I think, is kind of funny. I just laugh when he's on screen, and the whole idea is interesting. Like they show up at your house and they're like, "You're gonna have a turret, and aren't you lucky to have a turret at your house?" And he's like, "Yes, I am lucky to have a turret at my house." But I don't know. I got nothing else to say. It's super, 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 super long for what it is. Oh my God.
Over an hour shorter than Heaven's Gate, by the way.
Should have blown it all up. I don't know. And actually had some murder.
I would definitely unwatch this film.
Whoa, 3.
Ding, ding. I'm not sure that's even happened.
I don't remember
before.
the last time. I don't know if we've had a 3 unwatch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will. One comment that I kind of been swirling in my head as we've been talking about it is there is that phenomenon of Heaven's Gate is the epitome of it. Of other movies that come to mind are Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Once Upon a Time in America, the Sergio Leone film, of course. Those are movies that came out in these bastardized cut versions because the studio didn't believe in them. And so when they came out, they got terrible reviews. And then years later, they come out in these director's cuts and they're proclaimed to be masterpieces. So naive lad that I am, I thought maybe the 2.5 hour version
We're so proud of you.
of 1941 would, well, that might, this will be better. It'll all make more sense now. And somehow there'll be more rhythm to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't just seem like this big, loud, tiresome mess. But no, it was just a half hour of more of the same, basically. And so, yeah, I profoundly dislike this film. And it is fascinating that it had, this guy made Schindler's List and he made 1941. Those are two pretty different views of World War II. But it is fascinating that it did not affect his career negatively in any way. I mean, Scorsese took quite a while to bounce back from New York. I mean, he had to make After Hours for virtually nothing to kind of prove that he could make a movie like at a low budget and stuff. I mean, he had to fight his way back. And that's often the case with directors when they get a big bomb like this. But not Spielberg. He moved right on. So good for him.
I imagine it was the
Good for
franchise
us.
aspect.
Yeah, good for us.
Yeah.
Now, Coppola, you could argue, was one of the people who did not bounce back, at least in a big way. But I wouldn't necessarily blame One from the Heart for that. I just think everything after Apocalypse Now is just different from before as far as his career goes. And maybe this was a good break for him, but this is a really good pairing of films because, once again, he was coming off consecutively, starting in 1972, The Godfather, The Conversation, Godfather Part 2, Apocalypse Now. And this was his follow-up to Apocalypse fucking Now.
Right.
Yeah.
And which was one of those movies that was in the trades constantly for how much money he was spending. And this was Coppola's grand folly, and that it was going to be this huge disaster. And while it wasn't like a huge money maker, I think when people finally saw it, they were like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like he was totally vindicated for that. And it's kind of like he went for another one. He tried to get 2 in a row like that. And this one was a big flop. It had a $26 million budget. It made $637,000.
Right.
Not even a mil.
Apparently this started as a project with MGM where they were going to pay him $2 million to direct it. And for whatever reason, he rejected that offer and bought out the rights so that his Zoetrope Studios.
Yeah, Zoetrope, which was his studio.
Right, was going to do it. And the budget went from like 15 to 23 million. And I think sometime during that process, he got the idea that this romantic drama was going to become something much stranger and more ambitious. And stuff like this. So this entire movie is shot on sound stages.
Right.
And we see streets, we see buildings. They actually built a set of the airport and the jetway and the airliner that we see in this movie.
Yeah, you
And
see
it's huge.
a jet fly over, right? And he recreates Las Vegas.
In the studio. It's like Synecdoche, New York, but for real.
Yes. But also, I kind of wonder what exactly is his concept for this movie. So, we have super stylized, colored lighting that shifts during a scene. These very stylized camera moves and the artificial sets. That's all very intentional.
Right.
It looks like
amazing,
like a 50s musical or something.
Yeah.
But it's not a musical. But at certain points, it kind of is. There's a dance number. There is a song that one person sings.
Right.
But the soundtrack are these Tom Waits and Crystal Gale songs.
Right.
So, and I feel like this wants to be a musical, but it's not really. So I was kind of confused as what exactly he was trying. What was this very conceptual movie's concept?
My understanding of that film is that, of course, famously, Apocalypse Now was filmed in Southeast Asia, and basically, there was the famous his line, this movie isn't about Vietnam, it is Vietnam. This is Coppola at his most grandiose, and the film, went way over budget, and we all know. I mean, there's a documentary on. I mean, there's books about Apocalypse Now that tell the story about what he went through to make it. And your summation is exactly right about how ultimately he was vindicated with that. But when he came out of that, he then started getting obsessed with this idea of having total control. Now, when you think about Apocalypse Now, this was a movie where he didn't have total control because there were typhoons and there were, having to...
He's in the jungle.
And then there was the, Philippine army that would supposedly are supposed to have helicopters coming in, but then they get called off for something else and they fly away while he's trying to film his scene. So I think he went to this rather sort of archaic idea of recreating the Hollywood studio system, but with his own approach. So as you say, he ends up buying this huge studio, and One from the Heart, the intention of that was just going to be the first of dozens, if not hundreds of movies that would be made in that studio by not only him, but by other directors that he was friends with. His cohort, Spielberg, was one at one time. At that point, he'd probably outgrown it. But I mean, Scorsese and just, a number of other directors that were all from that. George Lucas, John Milius, mentioned earlier. A number of these guys that were his buddies from like California film school and stuff. So he was really trying to open this up, and it was very utopian. I mean, he literally opened it up. He would say, like, we have days where anyone can come in. I want children to come in. I want to hear what their ideas, what kind of movie they'd like to make. Maybe we'll do it. I mean, he was just firing at all cylinders on this. And the other thing, ironically, that he was hoping to make part of this was that now he would have, this is ultimately my long-winded point, ultimately he would have total control. He was not going to be at the whim of the weather or of producers or anybody else. He was going to be doing this with his own money, and he'd be able to do it his own way. And he was pioneering what seems now rather primitive video technology, but it was at the time quite ahead of his time. Like basically he would film those scenes almost like plays. He would, they would take weeks of rehearsals and stuff, and he would film all those. And then he would have storyboards that he could go and he could stop on any one of these drawn pieces of a scene, and it would then show what they had filmed of that scene. And he could theoretically move that all around. So it was a hugely ambitious idea that he had. But the problem was that he just got in deeper and deeper and deeper and ended up owing so much money that even the studio ultimately, one of the reasons why the movie didn't make any money is because basically the distributor pulled it. I mean, they weren't even going to show it in previews. They'd seen it and they thought the movie looked so weird and bad that they weren't even going to show it at all. And he took the film himself and showed it at Radio City Music Hall. It was like an one night open thing. They had like 2 showings. And it was like, this is it. I want the public to see it, and they can judge for themselves what they'll think. And the reaction to the film was very mixed. Some people thought it was interesting. Some people didn't like it very much. And that was all it took for then the studio just to say, fine. I think they released it 1 week, at like whatever the minimum would have been at that time, 12 theaters or something. And then they just pulled it, and it was not available to be seen at all for years.
That's almost exactly the Heaven's Gate story.
Yeah.
Also.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And so to me, it's, what I admire about this film is his crazy overweening ambition. And I think there's aspects of the film that are really cool. and really interesting and look really great because of, like you say, the whole kind of Fantasia aspect of the film where everything is so overtly, obviously artificial. You know, there's outdoor scenes, there's in the desert and things, and of course, again, Las Vegas and the airport. I mean, it's just nuts. But it all looks fake. I mean, it looks overtly fake. And the lighting is changed, strange.
Yeah, definitely purposefully.
Colors will move in odd ways and stuff. So I admire his ambition for it. I think probably the weakest part of the movie, and then I'll shut up and let Seth talk.
No.
Well, I think the weakest part of the movie is the story, which is a, can be summed up in like a sentence virtually. It's basically a couple who, man and a woman who have been together for like 5 years, and it's their anniversary, and they are both unhappy with the gifts that they give one another. And it makes them kind of question the relationship, which turns almost immediately into a huge fight. And then it's kind of like, that's it. We're over. We're breaking up. And they both have this night of like being with their fantasy lover, theoretically. And then at the end of the film, I'm going to give it away, the ending, they end up theoretically back together. Seemingly they're back together.
Yep.
So that's a pretty hackneyed story. That's basically the story. But the way it's conveyed, I thought at times had a lot of charm and a lot of I thought it was just cool to look at. And I love the music by Tom Waits, who wrote the music for that, and all the music. He wrote all the instrumental stuff too. I thought that the songs in that were kind of like a Greek chorus. It's like they're commenting on what's going on, not directly, but sort of in an indirect, slightly oblique way. But they're commenting on what's going on in the characters' heads in a way that's actually far more interesting than what the characters actually say themselves.
Yeah, which is kind of, you're right. It is kind of banal and is the biggest critique of the movie. And I'd like to get into it too and see what you think, Mark, as far as that's concerned, which is so much to talk about surrounding the movie and its history, and also what is going on filmically, like in a shot, like they're just talking and saying the most kind of just beat for beat romantic comedy sort of romantic movie things that we've seen in a million movies. But the wall suddenly is a mirror and there's a face behind it, and there's green, and then it goes red, and they walk through a door, and is it a model? Is it a real house on a set? We don't know sometimes. But at the center of it is this aspect of it being a reactionary movie to Apocalypse Now, which is he wants to make a little movie. It feels like he started out and he says like, I'm not going to do that this time. I swear.
Right.
I swear this time it's just going to be boy meets girl, and they break up and they get back together, and he's trying to keep it, I think, almost in a way that I find endearing. He's trying to keep it archetypal and in a way that it kind of muted in a way, almost to a fault, where, yeah, it feels like it should erupt into real musical numbers, but he does let them be like kind of ordinary people. Like, I like the two, at least the woman. I don't really like the main actor, what's his name?
Frederick Forrest.
Who looks like the guy from Dire Straits.
See, that was my first question when I saw I saw this Frederick Forrest as top billed, and I was like, who? And that was kind of the first warning of I don't know. I like Terry Garr, but this guy, I mean, it's not like
I
he's bad
love Terry. I love her in this, actually. I think they're both, at least they look normal. They're very normal people doing normal things, and that's what he's striving for. I think he's trying to do that, and he's trying not to let them have some big wild scene that makes them into like actually like George Clooney or La La Land, which or it erupts into this real star power sort of thing. It's not. They're still just kind of schlubs from the start to finish, and they do have these wonderful dream lovers that they get to run around with, but they return as schlubs to each other with their normal love, which I think is kind of sweet in a way.
as a side note, Frederick Forrest probably is most well known for he was chef in Apocalypse Now.
Okay, I saw that was in his credits.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you meant like he made them food.
No.
And it's like no.
He was
No, he's
the
one,
food
craft
was so good he
services.
made him the star of his next film.
Yeah.
he's one who swears never to get out.
But I don't know. The central, just simple love story doesn't bother me too much. And I like that it is this weird lopsided thing that while you're watching this kind of, where it's going thing that isn't all that novel, you're getting this wild feast of technical extravaganza and everything. I'm kind of into that, really.
It's faultless on that level. Like it's shot in the Academy ratio, Vittorio Storaro from Apocalypse Now, and a bunch of Woody Allen movies, and Conformist, which is one of the most like incredible looking movies I've ever seen, is filming it. We have these amazing transitions between scenes that are clearly like two different sets right next to each other, where one is suddenly revealed behind the next. Like that stuff's great. And really the opening credits, I don't know if that might be like the highlight of the movie, when just the curtain opens and you're hearing the Tom Waits songs and the camera is like going through all of these weird little miniatures that
There's
have like
mountains that look like
them.
sleeping women. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You're
right,
like, holy
right.
crap, this is going to be awesome.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then I think and that kind of deliberately artificial thing I love is right down my alley. Like I love a lot of movies that have that kind of approach to it. And I think that the issue is that this never really hits in on why it's telling this story in this particular way. Because if you look at it on paper and the idea is he's telling this banal, everyday, relationship story you can relate to, but it's blown up to these, gigantic movie proportions, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And that describes some of my favorite movies, but I don't think he leans into that enough, because this isn't Dancer in the Dark. It's not like New York, which does a similar thing where it takes this old Hollywood style and then juxtaposes it very sharply with this new Hollywood, like naturalism and ugly psychology and everything, which is very bracing. And this isn't really about that, but it also never totally embraces being a throwback, like joyous, musical with its normal story. And it kind of takes this middle way where they end up with these kind of bland, like sitcom characters, and they have bland sitcom arguments.
Yes.
And their love interests are even blander than they are. I mean, Raul and Julia is always cool, but
He's
the one that whoever the lady is that the
Nastasia
husband,
Kinski.
the guy goes through,
Nastasia
did
Kinski.
nothing for me. And really, even Raul and
very
Julia doesn't
forgettable.
get to have that much fun. And
he's funny.
I don't
He's
know.
a silly little man.
and especially when there's a movie out there called The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which
Sure.
is exactly what I'm describing about a very small, mundane, real life story that is one of the most gorgeous, like stylized musicals I've ever seen. And it's probably like my second favorite movie ever. And that I guess that was just something that I can't help but think, all right, that's the perfect way you could execute something like this.
Well, that
And
film.
I could not care about these people.
No. Well, Umbrellas of Cherbourg. That's all sung too, isn't it? Pretty much.
That's right. Yeah, it's basically sung through.
Yeah.
But also, it's not. It's very kind of. They're not the kind of songs you really would hum
No.
or sing along to. The dialogue is all like, "Oh, I have to go to the cleaners and pick this up," or "I'm going to walk down the street," and it's this really crazy.
Yeah. No, it's a great
thing.
movie. Yeah. Well, and we're mentioning the dance scenes, and it's like the dance scene in maybe because I watched these films, within 1941 and One from the Heart within a week long period. I thought that, like, as annoying as I found the 1941 dance number, I thought that the dance number in Vegas with the cars and Raul Julia, like, with his legs on two different cars coming down, and the way it was choreographed. I thought that was like very fun. I liked that. I enjoyed that.
Me too. Yeah.
Natasha Kinski, Klaus Kinski's daughter.
No way.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
God rest her soul.
Yeah. Wow. She's doing great.
Yeah. She was a, huge sort of sex symbol at that time. So to have her in that movie was, sort of a coup. She was a sort of idyllic woman. She is a weak point in the film. Her acting is very weak. I don't even think
she's the one who gets to sing too. The only one who gets to sing.
Right. She has the one number. Yeah. Not terrible, but not. Yeah, I guess I see your point where neither her or Raul really seem quite to live up to the total fantasy level. Although, like Seth says, they're both kind of goofy. I mean, the Raul Julia character is a fraud, right? Because he acts like he's this singer that is in
isn't
a
that
big
the
nightclub, but he's really a waiter. So, which is funny. I like that.
Yeah, they both have those moments. I think same with Klaus Kinski's daughter.
Yeah.
Also has that moment where she's idyllic, angelic, and then the next morning comes sort of, and he sees her as a normal human being, and there's they would have problems too, and her and Raul Julia would have problems.
She does have that good scene though towards the end of her character arc where which is kind of touches on the whole fantasy aspect, where she says, I'm the kind of girl, I forget the exact line, but it's something to the effect of, I'm the kind of girl, if you want to get rid of me, just close your eyes. I'll be gone. Good line. And that's a good line because she is a fan. And then she even says something like, it'll be like spit on a hot griddle. All of that. Great.
Which I guess I would the only thing is I think that isn't done well there is that she exists to be that, which is just that she's admitting she's just a throwaway girl, where Raul Julia feels like it's more rounded out of the actual arc, which I think he's trying to do.
Sure.
Or I feel like he should be doing, which is communicating that
right to the end.
You go out with the sexy person you've always wanted, and then you do figure out whether it's now or the years after that they are just normal, and you're going to have the same kind of problems that you have with what's-his-face or something. Although I would say at the end of the day, she should have stayed with Julia. Oh man, they have chemistry, like even just on camera chemistry. They're fun to follow around and stuff.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because it did. It kind of bugged me because they gave her so many chances to get away. You know what I mean? It seems like there's like 3 final breakups, and then she's finally actually getting on the plane.
Yeah,
and she still comes back to Frederick Forrest,
which we're totally denied. Also, her making that decision, like, I mean, she seems torn about it when she gets back onto the plane, but the whole ending of the movie was very underwhelming to me too, because it was just him being, really sad about it, and then after a long time, suddenly there she is, she's back, and the movie just kind of ends.
That's why I said earlier that, with that typical story, you would think, and they live happily ever after. You don't get that vibe from this film. I don't anyway. I don't know that it's intentional or not.
It would have been much more interesting.
To me, it's almost like I'm not sure they're going to stay together.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they really have solved any of their problems.
If she should go back, that would have been much more interesting.
And whether it is chemistry on screen or not, there just is a feeling that we as an audience are not engaged in their coupling. Like the beginning should have been really a lot weighs on that opening 20 minutes or so. It's supposed to convince me that they should be together, and it doesn't. So when they break up, I'm kind of like, let's keep going, I guess. But I guess, I don't know, the most generous thing I can say is that I do see a little bit of that as far as like couples and stuff, where you're just like, why are you guys together? Why are you guys the ones that stayed together for 8, 10, 20 years? I don't know, but you did. And there's something you guys have that I can't see. There's something that lovers have that is just only they have. It can't really be communicated to an audience, I guess. But again, that's me being generous.
Yeah. One thing also I'll mention about the film that was a tiny bit jarring in watching it today, because I saw the movie years ago, but I had not seen it for so long that I didn't really remember much about it. But I couldn't help but notice, gee, Terry Garr has her clothes off a lot.
Oh, I noticed that.
Yeah, which is, you know,
Yeah.
which is kind of like why, you know, it's fairly gratuitous. I mean, once coming out of the shower, okay, but the next thing you know, she's always suddenly deciding to change her clothes.
Does not fit the tone.
It just,
of what they're going for
right,
with her.
Right. Well, but it fits that time.
It's very
That
early
late-
80s.
Yes, there's a. I've always had this theory that like every movie made for adults from about 1974 to about 1983 or so, you'll always see women's breasts. Yeah,
Boy, has
because
that-
you have to.
Yeah.
It's like, you know.
Boy, have the
Because for
Times
adults.
just overcompensated against that now.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've gone the
They're not
absolute
going to see
other way.
breasts on the big screen.
Again,
Save
just
your
these
life these
arbitrary ebbs and flows that the
Right.
mainstream audience goes through. But
But it's interesting to look at this in the context of the rest of his career, because obviously this was a disaster as far as the expectations that he had for it. And, you know, my favorite movies by him from this post period are some of the most modest ones, like Peggy Sue Got Married or Tucker the Man in His Dream, like much smaller movies.
There's a
that-
reason for that, though.
Mhm.
He had to pay off all that debt. He owed
Oh,
millions
sure.
of dollars, and so he basically made all those movies for nothing, including Outsiders and Rumblefish. Like, I mean, he at most got paid like scale because
Right.
every penny he made, he had to. And that's another reason why Coppola started his vineyards with his
Yes.
popular wine.
That
was
bailed him out,
really
finally.
to bail him out financially. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how he financed his new movie that we have not seen, that is on its way, and we'll see. He can't stop doing big, crazy, potentially financially disastrous.
See, I admire, and
gambits,
I really admire him for this.
Sure.
And that's been
Yeah.
sort of the subtext to this whole conversation is that Coppola now in his 80s or whatever is still doing the exact same thing. He still put all his own money up. He sold half of his vineyards to fund this Megalopolis film. And what is happening with it? The exact same thing that happened with Heaven's Gate
Mhm.
and New York, and et cetera. The movies we've discussed. It's like all our people are talking about is what I just said. How much money it cost, which frankly isn't that much compared to a lot of
No,
huge
it's
blockbusters.
just that it's his
but
own
it's
money.
his own
Yeah.
money.
Mhm.
And so it's like, that's what everyone's talking about. And then how ambitious it is. And you already get the feeling from looking at reviews of it that people aren't reviewing the movie. They're reviewing
Mhm.
this, this backstory about it. And so it's going to be the same story again. We probably won't be able to, is it going to get distributed, right? That's part of the story about Megalopolis now is distributors like, how do we sell this film? It's a little too long. How are we going to show it in theaters and get our money back and stuff? I mean, it sounds almost like he's going to have to do One of the Heart or something and show it on his own. But it doesn't stop him. He does it anyway. And I read an interview with him from the time of One of the Heart where he said, when everything had gone bust, after the film had come out, and he said, well, people say, well, how can you take these risks? How can you, you're risking everything, all your money, all your fortune, maybe your career. And his reply to that was, he said, I consider the risk not doing it. He says, Coppola says, if I at least try, maybe it will be what I hope it to be. And if I don't try, it's not going to be anything. So it's not a risk. The risk would be not even trying. I think that's kind of, if you can do it.
Yeah.
If you have that kind of agency to be able to do it, well, it's pretty admirable.
Well, it's right there in the title. It is One from the Heart. This was going to be his sweet movie, like the opposite of Apocalypse Now,
Right.
which I have
That's
read.
a good point. I really hadn't thought of it.
Yeah. I have read things. There was, I forget, it was a producer and somebody else, and they were talking about it. And I was also reading about some of his private life around this time, and I know that he had extramarital affairs that I think are no secret, and even his wife has talked about it and things like that, which is interesting in the context. And again, not to make more, because there's just constantly a storm of narrative around this movie that makes it impossible to not make your eyes go crossed. But there's sort of this idea that maybe this is for his wife, his long-suffering wife who saw him through Apocalypse Now, and he is like communicating like, yes, I go to these dream lovers or whoever it is, these extramarital situations and things, but I come back to you. Or it's like on some level, I feel like it's true. It must be some sort of love letter to the one he really loves.
I think you're right. That occurred to me.
Which, of course, it's interesting in the context of it being the thing that wrecks him. And it's also interesting in the context of it being about a couple that is, by the end, is unconvincing by even people that, like me, that like the movie. Mm-hmm. I'm not really all that convinced by the chemistry, and I don't know if they should be together. And it's like, which is always interesting about these things.
It's One from the Heart is a classic example of a film that I think is flawed, but its ambition cannot be denied, and things about it that are interesting are really interesting.
I agree. And I'll make that my final thought. This is no 1941. And, but it's also not what I consider to be misunderstood, really good movies like New York, or Heaven's Gate.
Sure.
So it does kind of fall in between there, but that big ambition and the wild way that it looks and the big swing about it are what is good.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, it's definitely a flawed movie, but the spirit is there, and it kind of falls right there in the middle for me. It should not have been anything that was, in a perfect world, this would have just been an interesting, not quite successful experiment, and he would have just moved on, as opposed to this narrative developing around it and everything.
Right.
So it's it's kind of falls right in between those extremes for me, and there is a lot of things in it to still find interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So no unwatch for sure. But what about you, Seth?
Yeah. I think there's always going to be caveats. I would be amazed at someone who just outright loves this movie from top to bottom. And I don't know. I could believe that maybe there's a lot of layers here. Even in the parts like just that hold me back, like the central couple and everything, that I could maybe slacken about with more watches of this movie, which I do want to do eventually. But yeah, it's far from an unwatch, and I do enjoy it a lot. And I'm a person who really likes Dracula. I like Coppola's Dracula and Rumblefish, and I like this later period I didn't realize it came from this. That is this flashy, all the colors going everywhere, and about control and stuff. And I like the sweetness. I like the idea that he's trying to make something. It reminds me of like after Magnolia, Paul Thomas Anderson made Punch Drunk Love. He's like, I'm going to make a small movie, and even that, but he's still like, that's him making a cute rom-com. It's a bizarre movie. Punch Drunk Love is also a bizarre movie. This is also a bizarre version of a guy who can't quite do that. He just can't make a simple fucking movie to save his life, and which produces interesting results for sure.
So I guess to use the correct nomenclature, I would call this not an unwatchable. Yes. I'd watch this movie again. I'd see it again. But it's definitely a film that you would kind of, to what Seth is saying, I would maybe recommend it to certain friends of mine, but I'd say with not with reservations, but just sort of, you can't say it's a great film. You can't say that it's totally you know, like this movie's going to blow you away. It's one of the best things you've ever seen. Because it won't. I mean, I don't think it can. I don't think it would have that effect on virtually anybody. It just, the flaws are too real. But again, in terms of the way the film looks and what he's trying to do with it, and the way I love the music to that movie. I think the soundtrack would be a good album, probably, you know, if you just listen to it.
And this is the beginning of his really great period, I think. Tom Waits.
Yes, it's well, here's a little tidbit for you. That is where he met Kathleen Brennan. She was a set designer, I believe, or had something to do with the production of that film. And then he ended up marrying her, and the next that's, you know, he always, I mean, if you notice, she always gets co-writing credit on albums beginning with Swordfish Trombones. And so in Rain Dogs, that whole later period,
good ones.
And he and he admits that. He says that he opened his head up to all this music that he'd never really listened to, like Captain Beefheart and certain avant-garde composers and stuff. And so, yeah, that's where he met her, though, was on the set of From the Heart. It's kind of a successful love story, I guess.
Yeah, all kinds of peripheral good things coming off of this.
Yeah.
Can anybody do a good Tom Waits impersonation? Like
I can do pretty good Tom Waits.
The movie is really expensive.
I don't have words.
That's more Rain Dogs, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's like Bone,
Tony, you wanna
Machine
chime
or
in?
something. Yeah, that's pretty good.
There's some cats around here. Maybe
I think we did all the eras. I think we just
my
did all
cats
the
just
eras.
jumped out the window. All right, well, Bob, thank you for not only for joining us for this and the enlightening conversation, but for sitting through two different versions of 1941, which I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
That was my great sacrifice.
Yeah.
You really did it.
But it's been my pleasure to be on, you guys. This is a cool, fun podcast, and I love movies, so I love, talking about them, and what you guys are doing is great. So thanks for asking me.
Absolutely, Bob.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want to tease coming up with your podcast? I know that you don't necessarily, you kind of have a backlog of them coming out, right? So I'm not, but let's imagine this came out, tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the best thing I guess I'll just say to promote our podcast is it runs as a radio show every Thursday night on the Summit at 10 p.m. And then after that, it's available wherever you get your podcasts. So, Apple, Spotify, Google, et cetera, YouTube. And so, so if you want to check it out, it's easy enough to do. So, and a lot of fun. And I think we've had some great guests, and just invite people to, give it a listen.
Even if you're not in Akron, there's all kinds of shit going down here.
I heard you guys like sometimes ask about favorite movie stuff. Like, so who are your favorite movies? Like, do you have favorite film? It's a hard question. Since I had heard that was a possibility, I was trying to think about it. And I'm like, I have some answers, but
That's so
it could
sweet.
change.
We always ask the guest. No one ever asks us.
Okay,
Well,
right.
yeah, I would.
Hang
I
on.
would say,
Let's do
okay,
it this.
okay.
I feel like I could answer for Seth, and Seth could answer for me.
Let's see.
All right, very good.
Right? I believe.
How well do you know your spouse?
I think that Seth's favorite film is
Like the Newlywed Game.
Gus Van Zant's My Own Private Idaho, right?
Yeah, it's always juggling that in 2001. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
Depending on the day.
don't just give me the win. You have to give a caveat. That's fine.
But all right, you win. Yeah.
right.
More days out of the week, I would rather watch that movie, I think.
Guess his now.
All right, I have to guess yours, and it is definitely Night of the Hunter. I don't think you juggle.
Yeah, no, I don't. There's no. Honestly, I would probably put Umbrellas of Cherbourg right behind it, but no, that's my number one.
There you go.
1955, Charles Lawton.
You don't have to tell me about that film. That's one of my favorites too. I was going to say that probably my three. Again, I thought I have three favorites, which maybe could change completely a week from now, but not really. They're always going to be in the top 5 for sure. Oddly enough, Apocalypse Now, it would be one. And I will add the original version of that film. Frankly, I've seen every version of it repeatedly. I saw the Redux with all the scenes that had been cut. Then I saw the supposed final version. Coppola can never let anything alone, right?
Just like Spielberg and Lucas.
Yeah.
None of them can stop.
Right. But really, I think the most powerful version of Apocalypse Now remains the original release of it. Rear Window by Hitchcock.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
And that's the epitome of a movie that, like the cliche goes, if you turn on TV and it's halfway through, you're still going to watch the rest. I mean, I just get caught up in it. Everything about that film I love, from the look to the music to the story. And I never cease to get freaked out when the Raymond Burr character looks across the patio area at
breaks that wall.
Jimmy Stewart, and you can tell that he's
looking at me.
Him. Oh, and he tries it back. It's too late. And Night of the Hunter. I love that movie. And
nothing else like it.
Robert Mitchum is one of my all-time favorite actors, and I think he's highly underrated as an actor, and his performance in that is so good. And the whole mythic aspect of that film, talk about artificial, right? I mean,
Yep.
The famous river scene where the kids are going down the river in the boat, and the rabbit, and all the, those, like, it's also obviously
totally
fake, but it's really dreamlike,
Mm-hmm.
and which is exactly what it's supposed to be. And then, the malevolence of his character, but then it's funny in a way, at the end of that story, and then it turns into a Christmas movie, and it's very touching.
Yep.
The ending is so mysterious.
It's a tragedy that Charles Lawton never got to make another movie, because that movie, although I guess maybe it's perfect that he didn't. Great movie, great film. Choice on your part, because it agrees with me.
Yeah. Sorry for disagreeing
Yeah,
with you.
Seth hates it, so.
No, I don't. Maybe it's in the top 20 or 10 for sure.
Yeah.
But you
Definitely.
mentioned 2001, and
2001
Kubrick is one of those guys that
that's
I
in
could
my
name 3 or
top
4 of
5
his
probably
films.
also.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Come on.
Come on.
Come on.
Well, on that note, you haven't seen Southland Tales, have you?
No.
Okay, then we don't have to even bring that up. We can end this on a happy note.
Happy note. The best answer.
Absolutely. All right. Well,
thanks again, guys.
again, thank you. And that was one from all our hearts.
All hearts.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.